think like as a marketer, some advice that I can offer is to put yourself in a situation in which you have a resource constrained experience. Growth hacks are relatively low risk because they're supposed to be very low budget or low time effort initiatives with potentially ridiculously high returns.
In this episode, we sit down with Stefan Gergely, an entrepreneur, a growth hacker, and a tech enthusiast with a wealth of experience in growing businesses. Stefan was part of Under Development Office, a full-stack development company specializing in mobile solutions. The company worked with big clients like PwC and Deloitte before being acquired by Zetec, one of Romania's largest digital agencies. Following the acquisition, Stefan led growth efforts in mobile, blockchain, and advanced technologies at Zetec, helping the newly formed department. Now, as head of growth at Veridion, Stefan is at the forefront of a big data and AI-driven business intelligence company, leading a team of 8 marketers. That's a lot of people. With hands-on experience in building and scaling products, acquiring users, and leading growth teams, Stefan will hopefully share with us some of his well-kept growth hacking secrets. Hi, Stefan, and welcome to this discussion.
Hi, Maria. It's nice to be here. Thank you for the invite and for the introduction. That was, wow.
Happy to have you here. So, since you are mostly passionate and focused on growth hacking, how would you describe this concept?
I love answering this question. I actually get it quite a lot, especially from people that are from outside the marketing sphere. What I found, to be honest, is that I don't always give the same definition, but in broad terms, the principles are pretty much the same. Growth hacks and how you would differentiate growth hacking from like traditional marketing is that you need to have a couple of key components, such as primarily a ridiculous return on investment. Growth hacks are relatively low risk because they're supposed to be very low budget or low time effort initiatives with potentially ridiculously high returns. Growth hacks are also called hacks because they can take a huge variety of forms. There's no traditional medium for it. There's no recipe for how they look. And so the only thing that they have in common is this crazy discrepancy between the effort and the reward. If you want to talk about a couple of examples, some of my favorites growth hacking legends are the Starbucks strategy to write the wrong name on the cup. I don't know if you know about it, so that people make fun of it or take pictures and talk about it.
Basically, name wrong, right?
Yeah, spell the name wrong on the cup. It's very possible that these are myths to a certain extent, a whole bunch of them. So yeah, keep an eye out for that in the comment section. The Heineken strategy of which was pretty much a sales-based growth hack in which they would send the salespeople in disguise to bars throughout the Netherlands asking for Heineken, like a week before they would send the distributors to ask whether the bar wants to purchase Heineken. And yeah, sure, I'm sure there are plenty of others that are Googleable.
I see you know a lot of examples. So, what led you to tackle this growth segment of marketing?
I think I have a knack for it in a certain sense. It combines a whole bunch of things that I'm passionate about, from marketing to product and to behavioral psychology, I guess, or psychology in general, in a really, really nice fashion. That's pretty much why it was just, I don't know, it fit like a sleeve. I kind of grew into it.
And you currently work in a startup. I can also see in your background their logo, Veridion, yes. And I know that in a startup, generally resources are limited. And I'm talking here both time-wise, people-wise, and money-wise. And in my opinion, prioritizing is the hardest task of them all. So there are endless tests and experiments that a marketer can run. But in your day-to-day job, how do you find this balance between new and old marketing initiatives?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Always, it's a tough thing, not necessarily to talk about, but it's a tough thing to go through on a daily basis. It's a constant struggle. There are certain methodologies which you can apply. At Veridion, we use something we've for shits and giggles called the 70-30 hypothesis. It's not a hypothesis at all. And what we try to do is you line up all of the initiatives you have, and you basically rank them by their potential outcome, their costs, and how validated they are. When the marketing team was at its very beginning, basically everything was pretty much unvalidated. So then you ask yourself the question, you put like another column in your analysis, and you ask yourself the question, how easy will this be to validate or not? The idea being that you're trying to get to a point in which you can pretty confidently say what fits in the 70, which should be validated things, and what fits in the 30, which is experimental. It took us like, I would say maybe a year and a half, something like that, to get to the point in which we kind of had a relatively good idea between, out of all of the things that we wanted to do, what was in the 70, what was in the 30. Phase one to getting to that is where we prioritized. We had an unofficial 70, which were the things that we believed were easiest to validate or that were most externally validated, things that everyone does, like performance ads, for instance. And then you pretty much move up the ladder. And we call it the 70-30 hypothesis because that should be a rule of thumb as to how you invest your time and how you invest your resources in general. You put 70% into the 70, and guess what? 30% into the 30. Now, this doesn't work as like an out-of-the-box methodology to apply. It requires a bit of fine-tuning and a bit of getting used to because of the different dimensions from which you can look at resources. Especially if you look at human resources, they vary a lot from many different standpoints. Some people perform better on the short term. Some people are more consistent. Some people like a short-term challenge. Some people are better at certain things, blah, blah. Depending on these variations on the resources that you're investing, you want to be able to put the really smart things, the cutting edge things into the 30 and the repetitive, stable things into the 70. Yeah. And every now and again you revisit.
And iterate.
Mm-hmm.
And for this kind of experiments, or even like just going on the beaten path, I'm guessing that as a startup, you don't have such a large budget at your disposal. So what would be some examples where you got creative with the little resources that you had available? So how did you manage to do more with less?
I think specifically asking me this question under the hat of Veridion is an interesting one. In terms of the Veridion's competitive landscape is really a peculiar one, in the sense in which we don't find ourselves having a direct competitor. So we don't know of another company out there that does the same thing we do in the same way we do, that not exactly the same, but close enough that we would be able to consider them a direct competitor as a business overall. But from a marketing standpoint, we have a lot of competitors. The reason for that is because Veridion is a startup in the big data space. We sell company data for a whole lot of different use cases. And one peculiarity of the big data space is that the biggest buyers, or a whole lot of buyers, actually end up buying from multiple vendors in general, because the bigger your data asset, the more data you have, you can run more correlations, have a bigger chance of finding out what is the truth, and so on and so forth. So from a marketing standpoint, we are in a position in which we compete for the attention of end clients, even with our partners who resell our data, for instance. So it's quite clusterfuck. And we also compete even with our potential end clients further on down the line because of this entire phenomenon. Now that puts us in a situation in which we compete from a marketing standpoint. We compete with companies that have budgets that I think our yearly budget is smaller than like their daily budget or something like that. I mean, we're talking about some tremendous differences. Most of our end clients are the, Forbes 50 sort of tier companies. We're talking about in the billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, tens of thousands of people, so on and so forth. And so the discrepancy there is really, really big. Now, based off of how big this discrepancy is between you and your competitors, you have to make a strategy for how you spend your marketing resources. And that includes everything from time to money. That being said, there are a lot of things that you can do to spend money in or time in a smart way, or how you put it, to do more with less. One of the, I'll go through like the pretty much the by the book ones. If there's anything that seems like interesting to you, let me know. We can dive further down. One of the most obvious things to say, but it is worth saying here, is niching further down. So basically going for strategies that are more land and expand rather than trying to conquer an entire particular market. You specialize on one thing, you talk about one thing, that obviously makes it cheaper for you to do, makes it more efficient, makes it somehow easier to do more with less.
So you basically mean that you specialized on a certain marketing action, like we're really good at, I don't know, doing SEO, let's say.
Exactly. Yes. SEO, especially if you're competing with much larger players than yourself, SEO might not be the best place to start, because it's a long-term game that is quite cash related in the majority of cases. Obviously, there are exceptions to every sentence that's going to come out of my mouth. But if, for instance, you're looking at ads, you might want to be able to go for a infinitely more targeted profile than a competitor of yours is going. If your competitor is targeting the entire human resources team, if you sell towards the human resources team, you might want to just go for one particular job title, one particular geography, and trying to go for the principle of overflowing once you figure out really well how to sell to one particular niche, which your competitors, if they're bigger, they're not really going to be bothered in trying to do. They're just going to cast wide nets. That pretty much leads me on to the second point, which is, I think, like, as a marketer, some advice that I can offer is to put yourself in a situation in which you have a resource-constrained experience. It's quite counterintuitive advice in a way, but what you figure out, especially if like you're passionate about this whole growth hacking sort of thing, is that people whose experience has been largely in big companies don't really have a good grasp of what efficiency is anymore, because their expectations are set very differently from the get-go. You hear this, I think, especially if like you have agency experience. Agencies will hear this all the time, in which big companies just expect that something that to a startup seems like really small, their starting budget is like, okay, this is going to cost us 150 grand to say the least, and it's going to take 1 year to implement. And if you're someone who's worked in a heavily like resource constrained environment for a while, or if you are working in one, hearing that sort of sentence is just crazy to you. It's like really hard to picture what can happen.
I agree with you. And I think it's also the reason why startup founders shouldn't go and hire C-level executives from big companies, rather than looking at someone who's previously worked in a startup and, like you said, has this knowledge that they can work with limited resources. I think it's like a big difference between these two types of marketeers.
I have a friend who recently switched a job to a really big company, and he was just like in the beginning, like settling in, and he had quite an interesting project in which he had to optimize a feature or a user flow for one particular outcome to grow some number of subscriptions. And one of his ideas was they have a mobile app, among other things, and one of his ideas was to basically add a new screen in which they would aggregate some information that is split across other different screens in one particular place. And it really seemed like that really basic idea. You have a button which opens up a standard list of things which already exist. There's nothing new to be made, just bring some things together. And he apparently pushed this feature request, and he got back a timeline of something along the lines of 6 months and 100,000 euros. And when he told me this, I was just thinking about, if anyone in this company would go to any in Veridion, if if any technical person in this company would provide an estimate for a button and a screen of 6 months and $100,000, the police would arrive within minutes. Yeah. So I would definitely recommend some resource constrained experience. Although definitely, you need to be ready for it. You need to be prepped. It's something. Another point that I think latches on quite well to that is I wrote an article, which I'll shamelessly brag about at the end of this, in which I wanted to talk a little bit about, pretty much putting together all of the marketing advice that I have in one Bible of a text, and I didn't care about the length. And in doing that, at one point I had the curiosity to ask myself, I wonder how much copy has been written for no reason whatsoever. And using Veridion data, I thought I'd try to estimate what that is. So I don't remember the exact figures. I think maybe we can pop it up on the screen or something, because we made a little infographic about that in the article. But we monitor something along the lines of 450 million domains, which is pretty much the whole internet. Roughly, if I remember, something like 200 million of those are inactive or parked, or 150 million are inactive or parked, or something like that, leaving something along the lines of 200 million domains, out of which I guess something along the lines of 150 million or something like that had blogs. I estimated the number of average pages for those blogs, the average number of words for those blogs, for each of those blogs. And then I took the ones from which Ahrefs data would point that they have exactly zero traffic. So zero, not one, not five, not zero. And then estimated how much time humanity or marketers have spent writing text for zero readers. And it was something along the lines of before the existence of humanity, 115,000 years or something like that, spent writing text for zero readers. And I think this is something that is easy to do if you don't have some resource constrained experience, in which you really have to be pragmatic about how you invest your marketing efforts.
And not just going out and doing certain actions for no reason. But that's interesting. You basically defined for no reason as having zero readers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not completely fair. If was that where you were going with that?
Yeah. No, I was just curious how you thought it out.
It's not completely fair, because obviously when you write it, you don't know you're going to have zero views. You don't know you're going to have zero views. So you write it in the hope of having some zero views. But one of the things I jotted down for this is that you should pretty much have the more you want to do with less is basically the more you want to apply no limit to how pragmatic you can be. If you have an idea, if you have a marketing idea and you want to not spend time or money on it, try to poke holes in it, being as pragmatic as possible. And if out of a list of 15 or 20 ideas, which you try to be as hardcore as you can about criticizing them, one of them remains afloat by even a tiny margin, that's probably the one you want to start with.
I agree with you. And I think this applies especially in a startup environment. And since we're talking about startups, I wanted to also ask you, what would be some common mistakes that you saw founders fall into when it comes to growth hacking?
Okay. Do you have any off the top of your mind?
Yeah. I would say that the most common one, the one that I encountered most frequently, would be I hired a growth hacker and they'll get me viral on LinkedIn overnight. But I don't think that's really fair to say, because going viral doesn't really happen that easily, and it's not only a matter of knowledge there, but sometimes it's also a matter of luck. So that's why I believe that founders should set out with the right expectations in mind when hiring a growth hacker.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. Most of the things that I had in mind revolve pretty much around things like this. I think when I worked at the under development office in ZTech, and I think anyone who's worked in a development agency will be able to relate with this, the expectation you have from a client of how simple something should be to make is pretty much ridiculous, from a technical standpoint. You have someone that approaches you with an idea to build an operating system for email and calendar and blah, 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 and then expects it to be able to be finished in 3 weeks because it's whatever, 10 lines of code or blah, blah, blah. And I think this misconception is met much more in the technical space when it actually exists extremely frequently in the marketing space as well. People tend to underestimate the effort that actually goes in, the learning curve that actually goes in. And yes, so, okay, going viral overnight, the expectation that going viral overnight is doable, I definitely agree. That happens a lot. One that I would add is the expectation that you can copy something and it will work, I think is quite common. And I'm not sure here I'm addressing specifically mistakes founders make. I would put it more towards mistakes non-marketers make. If your founders are marketing people, they're probably not going to be making these mistakes. If they're non-marketing people, they probably are. Hoping is another one. I like hoping. Hoping is my favorite. Hope. I think I wrote in the article that I mentioned before, I think I wrote that hope is the death of growth. When you have to rely on hope, that's never a good marketing strategy. And I think marketers do that a lot. Sorry?
A bit pessimistic, don't you think?
Um, I don't know. I wouldn't say so. I mean, hoping is free. You can hope all you want. I don't have a problem with it. But if that's what you're relying on, then someone else is probably going to kick your ass if they're not relying on hope.
Hope and data, that should be like two indicators there.
Underestimating the effort it takes. Yeah, I mentioned that one. And I think yet another mistake that non-marketers make is they don't assume that the internet is one big lie. I think it's always safer to assume that the internet is one big lie. If you've heard that something worked before, the examples I gave at the beginning of this conversation, it's just easier to believe they're one big lie. You don't stand to gain too much from believing that they're all true. And yes, Heineken is this big beer brand because they sent 5 salespeople out to ask for a beer when they weren't actually distributing it yet. You just don't. If you just try to build an argument from the ground up and not rely on wild cards and things like this.
But don't you think that copying someone else's strategy could work if you apply correctly to your own field? Because I'm thinking that a lot of startups do this, but they don't really think if it really applies to their field as well.
I think copying works if you're talking about marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I think copying doesn't work at all if you're talking about great growth hacking.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The thing about growth hacks is that they're, I forget what the word is. There's a fancy word I would have loved to be able to say right now. But what is ephemeral? Whatever. The point is, you pretty much use it once and it's gone. It's very hard to repeat, and that's why they're pretty much like 0-day hacks in the technical space. They're so valuable because they bring tremendous results, but once it's been discovered, they're worthless.
Mm-hmm. I see what you mean. I have actually been listening to a podcast about growth hacking, and the guest was Sean Ellis. He's one of the people that coined the idea of growth hacking. And according to him, he was saying this really interesting thing that people keep trying to find a box in which they can put growth. But rather than thinking of growth as an ownership role, he believes that growth should be an influential role within a company. So a growth leader should look holistically across the entire business and collaborate with the owners of each area. And I'm saying here like product or content. And basically, growth should narrow down the opportunities and set up the processes for the team that actually owns that opportunity. What is your opinion on this?
Well, yes, Sean Ellis is considered to be basically the Jesus Christ of growth hacking. And while I would love to disagree with Jesus Christ, and maybe there are some topics on which I do, this is not one of them. I definitely agree. And I think it stems from a very underlying trait of growth in general, which is that it is truly agnostic as to how it is being applied. yet again, I think I mentioned this in the article. Growth can take many forms. Good customer support can be growth. Um, good good sales can be growth. Good product can be growth. Um, Growth can't be good customer support, like, or it doesn't apply the other way around. So I think for this reason, Sean is right to say this. I think there are many ways to implement this. So I think, like, I don't know exactly if there's a ideal recipe for how this has to look within a particular organization, but the underlying principle is that growth exists because marketing is getting more difficult. Marketing is getting more difficult because there are still 24 hours in a day and more products coming out there. And marketers have to compete for this exact same attention span of people against a larger and larger audience. So it's a zero-sum game that is getting harder and harder. And it turned from marketing to growth in my standpoint, because of this principle that it was difficult. It gotten to the point in which it's difficult to contain. Like, you can't just have a part of the office in which the people make jokes, like the memes of how people see marketing people in general. You make jokes and you write to a publication and you design a pretty poster and you put it out on the street and people stop and they look at it while laughing in the park, blah, blah. It doesn't work like that anymore. It's gotten to be an incredibly cutthroat sort of game in which 5% difference in the conversion rate from one point to another in a product while sales is outreach into them in a campaign can make a difference of millions at the end of a year. And that's why it's gotten to be like this. And that's why I agree. In terms of how you implement it, I think ideally you have someone keeping an eye on growth at the organization level. Ideally, this becomes an education to owners of particular departments so that they can learn to keep track of these things, because there is quite a decent overlap between, for instance, if we take product and growth. I think this might be one of the examples in which it's easiest for me to prove this point, so it might seem unfair, but I guarantee that it applies to any other department. The overlap of hygiene, if you were to make a Venn diagram of good hygiene principles for product intrinsically versus good principles for growth, there's going to be quite a big overlap there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and again, product is might be an example in which that's cheating, but it will apply anywhere. It will apply everywhere, even in a technical department. The easier your product is to understand or to use, and the more it does what it's supposed to, what it's interpreted to be doing, actually, then the more you have this overlap between good growth principles and etiquette and technical etiquette.
I like what you were saying about growth. Customer success can be growth. I actually talked to someone from another big company, big startup, and they were telling me that the customer success leader could actually be the marketer's best friend. Because if you were to listen to what customer success tells you that are the most frequent questions that your customers have, you could actually find ways to do marketing from that. Because your customers are the ones that are searching for you, are the ones that have the most questions. And he was saying that they actually use that to write articles. So the most frequent questions customers had, they transform that into blog articles and they optimize that for sale. And they actually use that as a growth ladder. So I thought it was quite interesting.
I completely agree. Customer success is a fountain of highly important knowledge for pretty much any and all departments in a company. Arguably not necessarily operations, but apart from that, yeah, definitely. And for marketing specifically, yes, absolutely, for sure. Well, it's really easy to prove this. If you're a marketer and you have to think of, what are the 50 versions of copy I'm going to be testing today in my performance ads? Well, maybe you can turn the 50 into 20 by just eliminating the ones that customer success has never heard a damn thing about.
Yes, I agree. One more thing that I wanted to ask you was about your advice that you have for marketeers, because I actually met you in an advice giving context. We met at How to Web, and I had a lot of questions that I wanted to ask you. And we previously discussed there about using automation to enhance work and how marketers should be at least a little bit technical. That was your advice. But why do you think this technical aspect is important?
Um, so I think I took a much more aggressive stance than that, than at least a little bit technical. Uh, I am happy to uphold as a position that non-technical marketers are on risk of being out of a job in 5 to 10 years. So I would turn the temperature up a little bit on that statement. Um, that's the reason why I make the recommendation. So in the long term, the reason why I make the recommendation is because you'll be out of a job if you don't. So it's slightly more pragmatic. But if we focus on the carrot and not the stick, um, what I would say is that the opportunity you have as a marketer to expand yourself, your efficiency, your capability, your output, whatever it is, if you build technical skills, is insane. So first of all, I think marketers in general are plagued by this, I'll change the word. They're daunted by how much they have to wait on other departments that don't take them seriously enough. That's a conversation of its own. I don't necessarily want to get into that one, but I'm sure everyone will resonate with this even for free. And being able to build some technical independence is great right off the bat, simply from that standpoint. Second of all, as a marketer, as you progress and as you build experience, you begin to learn patterns of what works and what doesn't work. Those patterns are difficult to convey, to spread the knowledge of towards other people, because they're oftentimes a combination of multiple things. It's not just, what's the correct way to structure a sentence in copywriting. It's that plus a particular audience, plus a particular timing, plus blah, blah, blah. It can be a whole bunch of things. The point being, the more seasoned you become as a marketer, the more successful recipes you build that primarily exist only within your own head. These recipes are exactly what you want to be automating. You don't want to be automating other people's recipes, because that'll probably, by the time you do that, it's useless and no one cares about it anymore. And you're going to want to automate these things that you learn work really well, that have become standardized for yourself, so that you can move on to do others. In my point of view, there isn't basically a single traditional marketer that couldn't 3x, 4x, 5x their own output by building technical skills, because they can just more or less replicate themselves as part of their own job. I've got a really good example to give here. I run this presentation on why marketers need to build technical skills. An example I give is definitely my favorite. As a growth hacker, one of the questions you ask yourself, or you force yourself to ask yourself, is how much better could I be delivering a particular something? So you try to ask yourself in the most ridiculous ways. Like, you look at one particular process and you don't think, could I optimize this by 20 or 30%? That's not for the growth hacking sphere. Any number beneath 100% doesn't qualify, like, basically at all. Ideally, you want to figure out the methodology to ask yourself the craziest questions possible. Could I multiply this by 10,000? Could I multiply this by 100,000? Or even better put abstractly, how far could this fucking go? We were getting ready to launch a product at one point. The principle of the product is very simple. You basically have a search bar in which you type in natural language what sort of companies you want to find. So you would say, I want to find all the companies in the world that have over 10 employees, under $50 million in revenue, and have locations in Canada. Whatever, doesn't matter. Then the way this product worked at that particular point in time is a 3-step process. So you put in your search, it builds a query for you. It shows you a couple of example companies. It helps you refine your search in case you want to. So you provide some feedback, and then you get to the third point, which is the final screen, in which it provides you all of your results for your final refined search. We were asking ourselves how to market this when we're ready to launch it. And obviously one of the things that came along is to build demo videos for it. So we started doing that. We made a couple of demo videos, and to find out that it would basically take us around 2 weeks to have a demo video finished, but like truly finished, not a bullshit 2 weeks. Like this is not the number you tell investors that it takes. No, this is the actual number from the point in which the first idea comes along to how long it takes to write the script. The script goes to feedback, and it takes a day because the feedback can't be given on the spot, and then it goes back, and then recording and editing and blah de blah de blah de blah de blah. So it would take us 2 weeks, and in gross salary costs, that would be somewhere around the line of $1,600 per demo video. Now, if you're one of our infinitely wealthy competitors, that's not a problem at all. If you're a growth hacker and you ask yourself, how efficiently could this be made? You can pretty much go to the point where we got, in which to ask ourselves, could we automate this entire process completely, start to finish? Everything in a demo video for this particular product be built by itself. Now, that's not a small feat, because you would need to have an AI that actually uses a product, understands how to use the product. You emulate the entire behavior. It took us 2 weeks to build the first version of this automated demo videos for this particular product. But we had gotten to a point in which we basically rebuilt the entire product in order to put it in such a way that an AI can control it. We emulated the interface to mimic the activity of what was going on in the back end. That is being handled by AI completely. And then we used Figma's prototyping and the APIs to populate that data, 11 labs to record the voice, some scripting to patch them both together. And we had gotten to a point in which, even in this like 2-week built basic version, built by non-technical people, built by technical marketers, and that's it, a demo video would take something along the lines of 4 minutes to make instead of 2 weeks.
Something that you could actually like repeat, iterate, right?
Yes, already. So what it would do is you would type a query, like I want to find all the companies in Western Europe that have over 10 employees and blah, blah, and you press enter, and then in 4 minutes, you have your entire video with a voiceover with the whole product being used. It gives itself feedback. It analyzes the companies. It goes, yeah, this company based on my search is not as good, so I thought I would add this piece to the feedback and then see what happens next. But it's completely insane. And so the net output the difference was, so from 2 weeks, we took it down to 4 minutes, and from $1,600, we took it down to something like 15 cents, 1.5 cents. I don't remember what that is, but the discrepancy in efficiency is in the tens of thousands as a multiplier. And what that means strategically is that if you're a competitor of mine that has infinite money, your money is worthless, because there's no company on the planet that can't afford 1.5 cents per video to be able to put this out at the largest scale possible. And there are a couple more levels of this to which I'm not going to talk publicly, but it gets significantly crazier than this in terms of how you can out leverage your competition when you have such potential for efficiency increases.
So you know that AI actually plays a really big role in these type of
Yes.
growth hacking experiments, because like you could be technical even before AI, but I think that now with AI, it has made our job even easier.
Yes. So I built this thing in 2 weeks. I hadn't written a line of code in like 5 years, 6 years, something like that. And even before that, I wasn't really anyone could do it. I built this with 2 weeks from the ground up with ChatGPT, doing nothing but smacking my head against the wall until I had something that worked. So it's really doable. What I'm trying to say is that it's really doable. prior to ChatGPT, if I had to build this, it would have taken millennia. And I'm not even kidding, because like the capability wouldn't have been there to do this particular thing. But even some other soft automation, whatever, would have taken a whole long time.
Well, it's very inspiring to hear. And to this extent, what's a piece of advice that you would have for a marketer?
Uh, so I'll really stick to my guns on this one. I really, really encourage to build technical expertise. I encourage people to do that by starting with a project. So don't start by, reading a book on Python for dummies. I would start by, if you're a content writer, for instance, if I would be my copywriter right now, I would ask myself, can I basically replace myself in this company? I know how I do my research. I know how I put together the information. I know how I get from the information to the final piece of content. So I'll just try to take this and automate it and build it completely technically from the ground up. Try to replace your job, a part of your job, something like that. Try to replace it completely, because that's a project you understand the behind the scenes of, you understand the process, and try to just replicate it. And you'll figure out that after the first 2-3 weeks of a really annoying learning curve, it'll really start to be smooth sailing, and a whole lot of things will be a lot clearer.
It's an interesting lens to look through, like you say, this perspective of trying to replace yourself.
Yeah.
Could you also maybe recommend any resources or share with us the names of people who inspired you in your marketing career? We'll link them all in the video description and add them to the newsletter as well.
Sure. So Sean Ellis is definitely a really, really great starting point. One of my particular favorite people with this sort of growth hack mentality. I don't think he knows to call it growth hacking. But he has a mindset out for these sorts of things, is Rory Sutherland. He's the former VP of marketing at Ogilvy in the UK, and now he's running, my information is still accurate, he's running a subgroup in Ogilvy called Ogilvy Change, in which he focuses on small ideas with huge impact, which is a really interesting niche. The article I wrote, I think, is a good one. Any text on behavioral psychology you can extend outside of the world of marketing just for this. And a solid recommendation that I have in terms of, thinking how to be pragmatic and think first principles as a sort of entry-level document is an article. It's a PDF you can find online, called "On the Folly of Rewarding for A Whilst Hoping for B." I think it's really, really good. Interviews with product people, all sorts of podcasts with product people, and keynotes. I would watch keynotes, especially early days Apple keynotes. I would watch them with thorough attention to be able, and I would try to picture, of all the things they could have said, why did they end up saying what they said and how they say it? I think running this practice while you watch certain, good keynote speakers, and I definitely don't recommend Google for this. I think they have amongst the worst, and Microsoft might even be worse. So yeah, go through reruns of Apple keynotes.
Awesome, Stefan. Thank you so much. It was a very insightful discussion. I'm happy that you agreed to be on this podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.